Did you hear they're showing a movie down at the drive-in?
The drive-in? What are they showing?
They're showing Stanley Kubrick's The Shining!
Well, we better go! Hey everyone, thank you for joining us here at the Digital Drive-In. My name is Alex, and I'm joined here as always by my co-host, Garrett Bernardo.
Hello.
And Garrett, what movie did we watch today?
Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, which is based on a Stephen King book called The Shining.
Wow, imagine that.
Stephen King's book is about a man who is an alcoholic that has lots of problems, but eventually overcomes them because he's still actually good inside, and they are able to defeat the evil. Stanley Kubrick did not like that and decided he was going to make his film about something different.
And he made it about man starts off bad, but then sees the good within himself and throws the Emperor over the balcony and plummets to the bottom of the shaft.
If George Lucas was writing The Shining, I'm sure it would have ended very similarly. It's funny you actually mentioned that because there's a scene in this film that reminds me of the Emperor.
Is there?
Yeah, when okay.
Or you could do it now. Fine.
When Ullman is talking to Jack and they're going over the things about the hotel, it's kind of like past his first interview.
Mm-hmm.
He has his arms on the desk, and it's almost like he's doing like a magic thing, like he's putting Jack under a trance with his hands, and it always made me think of the Emperor, how he holds his hands.
Good.
Did you notice that? Did you think that was weird?
I didn't notice that. So fuck you. I'll have to go back and watch it now.
There are so many little details that are very interesting about this film.
Well, we'll get into that in just a second.
We definitely will.
So, Garrett, what is your experience with The Shining? I know you absolutely hate this movie.
It's one of my favorite movies of all time.
And I know you absolutely hate the hack director that made it, too.
Right, and of course, as we're talking about, Kubrick is my favorite director. I'm an old guy, but I'm not so old to where I knew anything about The Shining in 1980 because I would have been 1 year old.
Yeah, right. 100 years old.
The very first time I remember anything about The Shining was I was maybe like 9-10 years old, something like that. And they were showing it on TV, obviously edited, for Halloween. They would show it, and I didn't even catch the entirety of the film. I saw some of the middle, and then I saw the very end. And the very end, I'm like, wow, this is crazy. I can't wait to see the full thing, to see how they explain the ending. And then later, when I saw the full thing, I was like, they didn't explain the ending at all. So, so it was like there was always something about this film that as a kid, I'm like, I'm not getting something. There's something else here. And so eventually when I started working at the video store in my late teenage years, I started going through everybody's movie thing, and I just kept coming back to The Shining again and again. And people probably don't know this about me. I don't necessarily watch films over and over again, but I've probably seen The Shining like 30 times, which is like ridiculous for someone like me.
Yeah.
So I can't get enough of it.
That's like 70 hours. That's how much time you put into here.
Wow.
So you spent like 70 hours in the hotel.
Yeah. So I should be crazy at this point.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? How did you come across The Shining, or is this the very first time you've ever seen it?
I've never seen it. I didn't even watch it for this podcast. I was just going to let you talk the whole time. I saw it a couple times. I mean, it's a fantastic movie. I just, I've seen it a couple times. I mean, I'm definitely going to something that I continually come back to because, like I said, it is a fantastic movie and one of those horror greats. And I think it does some really unique things and is very sort of instrumental in a lot of the horror films we have now, or certainly some of the better ones. I think I watched it for the first time maybe 3 or 4 years ago. hadn't seen it since. So when we came back to rewatch it for this, I remembered it. Obviously, it's a very memorable movie, but it almost immediately just sucked me back in right away, which was really good to see. I think I had it at a 4.5 on Letterboxd 3 years ago or whatever. And then upon the rewatch, I obviously had upped it to a 5 out of 5 because it was very, it was better the second time
Yeah,
around, I thought.
I mean, even just Kubrick films in general, they're ones that bear repeating, and you can come to at different points in your life, and you get more out of it or different things out of it.
Hmm.
So it's definitely one of those that even if a listener has seen it, a couple years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, it definitely is worth a revisit.
So one thing you wanted to talk about was the movie's intro.
Yes. Which I was always a startling, especially because I've seen it on the big screen later, not at the original release, but I've seen it a couple times at the theater. And the immensity of the mountain is just very majestic. And there's also mirroring, which we'll come back to later, of the mountain being reflected into the water. But
Hmm.
I always thought that because the music is a little different, it's Wendy Carlos, who's the same person who does the music for A Clockwork Orange. So it kind of like the instrumentation is almost a little more playful, but it has a very distinct sound. And what's interesting is this music is from something else. It wasn't originally created for the movie. And I'm going to screw up how it's pronounced. It's Latin. It looks like it should be pronounced Dies Irae, but I'm sure it's not pronounced
Dies
that.
Irae or
Something
something.
like that. I mean, I've only ever seen it written. I'm sure if
Yeah.
I heard someone actually say it that knew what they were talking about, I'd be like, oh, okay, that's it. But anyway, if you were to type that in, it is actually like I think it's Catholic. It's a funeral dirge, basically, about all the terrible things that are happening. But it's also a song of the apocalypse, like
Okay.
the biblical, like the world is coming to an end. The bowls are being emptied out. The trumpet blasts are sounding. It's like gods are fighting, basically. And I thought, what a really interesting way to open up a horror film with a song about funerals and the apocalypse.
Yeah.
That, like, subconsciously, you might not even recognize that that's what that song is.
No,
But
but
if
it's
you,
still that ominous feeling of it.
yeah, but if you did recognize what it was, it would give it that much an extra meaning as to
Yeah.
what's going on. And then you even have like the chants and the weird like voices and stuff talking. It just, and then with the way the camera angle is so high up, you almost
Yeah.
feel like something is following Jack
Hmm.
or there's something else there. And it almost gives you that sense of unease subconsciously from the first frame of the film. And it's like what a great way to start the movie.
That's just classic Kubrick, though, right?
Yes.
Knows how to use the camera to sort of evoke certain emotions.
And he communicates to you through a visual storytelling
Hmm.
device rather than having to spell it out in dialogue.
Something I think very few directors are doing nowadays, honestly.
Yes.
I
And
would
it's
say
not an
maybe
easy thing to do either.
no, no, not at all. I would say the closest I could find right now, maybe specifically limiting to horror, or maybe Yorgos Lanthimos, who did Killing of a Sacred Deer,
Mhm.
which is obviously very much a Kubrick Kubricky film.
Right.
And little hints every once in a while I found in Ari Aster, particularly in uh, The Strange Thing About the Johnsons more than Hereditary, where that camera used for the sense of unease and all that.
hmm It's interesting that you mentioned that because I feel like the same thing with like David Lynch is the people in Europe find those things and use those things way more prevalently than it seems like mainstream Hollywood does.
Hmm.
So maybe that's why I like more foreign film
Yeah,
than I.
maybe.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's not like mainstream Hollywood's not entertaining and they're not good movies, but it's just like as far as almost like being complete works of art and the way that they're able to tell stories in a different way than mainstream Hollywood. It seems
It's
like.
missing that sort of edge that filmmakers like Kubrick used to have.
Right.
And
Yep.
interestingly enough, Killing of a Sacred Deer and Hereditary are both A24 films.
Right. Which is why we like watching those now.
Very much so, yeah. They're very much a company right now that is fully embracing the filmmaker rather than the like how much money is this going to bring in. It's just tell your story kind of thing. It allows for a lot more unique stories to come out.
Exactly. And I think that people forget because these movies are so popular now, but Kubrick films when they were released were dividing critics. He never had like a really big hit. It was never like a
Mm-hmm.
Spielberg Lucas type thing where he had like a summer blockbuster. It was always, I mean, they wouldn't lose money, but it was just a moderate success with a moderate budget, and with the exception of this, a lot of times he had much smaller actors. Um, so it was not. It's not really until much later that Kubrick became as famous as what he is now.
Well, The Shining actually has a 63 on Metacritic,
Right. So that tells you all you need to know.
including like Time Magazine gave it a 5 out of 10.
No, and he was like we had talked about before that he was nominated for a Razzie for direction.
Yeah, 'cause he's a fucking hack. That's why. If I say it enough, though, people are going to believe me that I actually think that.
Well, if they really believe that, I think then they're a moron.
Hey, don't call our audience morons.
Well, if it fits. I mean, I'm not saying that all of our audience is a moron. I'm saying if they believe that what you're saying is true, then that person is ignorant of the
What
reality.
audience?
Well, that too.
I have been on a little bit of a Kubrick kick lately. I'd only seen The Shining when I started writing for the Nerd Mentality and all that, and obviously when we sort of met, I had only seen The Shining at that time. But I had bought a few of them, and I've slowly been chipping my way through the filmography, and it's a really interesting filmography, isn't it?
Yes.
And I was gonna say, have you seen Fear and Desire? But you've seen Fear and Desire.
Yes, I've seen all his films, including his short subject films, and I own all of them that are commercially
And do
available.
you like all of them or no?
I do like all of them, but I can definitely say that he didn't start his filmography.
Because I was gonna say, Fear and Desire is not good.
Right. It's not like Quentin Tarantino or Orson Welles or even a David Lynch start to the filmography. It's very average, very pedestrian. You did not notice any of the visual flair or storytelling devices that would make Kubrick Kubrick.
Now I haven't seen anything between Fear and Desire and 2001 yet,
Okay.
but the jump between those two films,
it's ridiculous. Yeah.
is. And then obviously I'm seeing A Clockwork Orange and The Shining.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting that the same guy did Fear and Desire.
Yeah.
Did those films, and it's sort of a really cool to see in what 15 years how much maturity can come between Fear and Desire and 2001. And I still have to see things like Paths of Glory and Spartacus and Lolita and Doctor Strangelove. But I wonder if you can almost see him come into his own kind of thing.
You can. It's like Fear and Desire is. I mean, I might as well just go into it. Fear and Desire is kind of like his. I don't know what I'm doing, but I think I can make a film, and it's literally his first attempt. I think he had likened it to like a children's drawing that you put on the refrigerator.
Mm-hmm.
He actually tried to destroy all the negatives, but Kodak, who was the person that processed it, keeps a copy of everything that they do.
Right.
And so the Library of Congress was able to get it from them and then produced a print from that. So that's the only reason it even exists. If it was up to Kubrick, he would have completely destroyed it.
And last I remember, that movie is on YouTube.
Okay.
As well. You can watch it there, or you can rent it, I think, on YouTube Movies, which is also Google Play Movies.
Okay. So. No, I bought the Blu-ray because I had to have it. And there are a couple interesting things in there, but it does. There's not really anything to differentiate it from all the other independent, small budgeted films of that time, and there's not really anything necessarily unique or that would give you the impression that this guy was a great filmmaker.
I do remember. I don't remember the film exactly, but I do remember seeing hints of that though, and seeing little fragments of like, wow, this is like, that was good, or like there's these little tiny little moments throughout where you can see that he is gifted a little bit,
Mhm.
and then I think it's just him coming into his own again that is where he really learned how to hone those talents.
Yeah, I mean it's not that it's a stupid film. It's just kind of like half baked, or maybe like it doesn't have like a solid foundation of what's going on. Because the guys that play the soldiers at the beginning, some of the characters or some of the actors play characters on the other side of the field.
Oh yeah.
And so that's one of the interesting things about Kubrick and like mirroring is he likes, he even from the very first liked to kind of play with that idea of these two sides of the war aren't so different after all, and like making them fake nations and things. So like there were some interesting decisions,
Hmm.
but it's like if you were to watch it without his name attached, you probably wouldn't necessarily think it's like, oh, okay, yeah,
Care.
it's just another movie.
So then, is The Shining your favorite Kubrick film?
The problem with that, it's always difficult. I look. It's just like with art. It's hard for me to say what my favorite Van Gogh film painting is.
Your favorite Van Gogh film?
Yeah, I actually have a favorite Van Gogh film, but it's hard for me to say like with Bob Ross. What's my favorite Bob Ross painting? Well, I like Bob Ross,
Right.
so it's sort of
Yeah.
like Kubrick is my favorite director. I almost can't say a favorite film of his because it's, some directors do all crime films or all western. He did, it's like every genre he touched, that movie is
Yeah.
in like the top genres of all time.
Yeah. I found that really intriguing when I was looking through his filmography. Is he really tried to make one of everything,
Yeah.
at least, which was awesome.
So I was like, what's one of your favorite or like some of the best anti-war movies of all time? Well, I put Paths of Glory
Mhm.
up there because that's one of the best. Like, what's one of the best sci-fi films of all time? 2001. What's one of the best like dark comedy films or black comedy films? Well, Doctor Strangelove, it has to be up there. It's one of the best horror, The Shining. So it's he touches on so many different things that it's hard. It's like if I'm in the mood for a horror film, The Shining will do that. But if I'm in the mood for a horror film, 2001 might not necessarily be, you know,
Yeah.
that sort of a thing. So it's hard to, I could almost, it's his films are almost interchangeable. Where it's like I could name any of them as being my favorite film of all time, and like it would actually sit well with me. But I hate
Right.
having to limit myself to that. So
Right.
it's the filmmakers themselves is more how I like to rate that stuff. But The Shining has always been one of the ones that I constantly come back to, and I can like pick it up and watch regardless of what mood I'm in, and I enjoy it. Sort of like how Back to the Future is that same
Mhm.
way. There are these films that it's like if you're in a bad mood, you can watch it. If you're in a good mood, you can watch it. If you want to laugh, you can watch it. And it's just like it fixes anything.
What if you want to cry?
If I want to, there's very few times I want to cry. If I want to cry, I'll watch like Grave of the Fireflies or something like that.
Mhm.
But I don't know
So
when I
then,
want.
top of your head, you have 5 hours to kill right now. You have the entire Stanley Kubrick discography. Put one in. What is it? Top of your head. First thing comes to mind.
If I,
Unless you waited too long.
I
Not
know.
allowed.
Well, I was 5 hours means that I could pick anything, so I'd probably pick.
That's exactly why I gave you 5
Yeah,
hours.
I would probably pick Barry Lyndon.
There you go. That was it. That's all I wanted to see. Back to The Shining. You talked a lot about, or you talked a bit about mirroring in Fear and Desire. This film has a lot of that too, doesn't it?
Yes, 100% does. I mean, there are a person sees it for the first time. You think, okay, well, there's the bathroom scene where Jack sees what it is he's kissing, and like the
Mhm.
reality of the thing is revealed to him within the mirror. So it's like that's an easy
Yes.
one. And then there's the one where it's like the setup shot where he's in bed and Wendy comes in, and then you realize it's the mirrored image of him in bed.
Yeah.
But there are other smaller ones, like when he's talking to Lloyd. There's the glass mirror of the bar behind him, so it's like he's talking
Right.
to a reflection. And then when he's in the bathroom talking to Grady, there's a mirror right there. And when he's coming down the hallway and it's like he's calm but maybe like brooding, and then he actually does a physical manifestation with his arms, every time he actually does something out, he is passing in front of a mirror, and it's like timed specifically to going by those mirrors.
So what do you think the purpose is of that then?
I think it's like the duality of man. Of
Okay.
Jack seems to be a certain way, but then as you get to looking at him, he is a different way. He was in the bathroom and saw all that stuff and was horrified and was backing out of room 237, but when he comes back and talks to Wendy, is no, there was nothing in there. There's nothing wrong. And it's like you don't even get an indication that he's lying to her.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like he's playing two different characters. And then Danny himself talks as himself, or he talks with his finger
Yeah.
as Tony. So he's the same character, but he's doing two different things. And I think it's interesting that there's so much of that in this. And even if it says nothing but there's this other hidden thing going on, and maybe what you see is not the reality until we show it to you, I think that that's a very interesting thing to put in a film as a psychological horror.
Yeah, very true. And you said almost with the duality of man and how he's sort of changing throughout.
Mm-hmm.
I found later, or when I was thinking about that, and you were talking about physical manifestations of with his arms and all that, he almost throughout the film boils down to like animalistic,
Yes.
almost.
Yes.
Especially, I find at the very, very end, and I know I'm jumping to the end of the film.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're going to do. We're going to jump all around here on the digital drive-in. Once it's all said and done, and Jack is lost in the maze or in the labyrinth or what have you, and Danny has escaped with Wendy, he's trying to say things. He's trying to call out to Wendy almost, but he doesn't speak any English. I don't know if you noticed that. You probably did.
Mm-hmm.
He's just sort of like he's starting the word Wendy, but it ends up just exactly, which I think is one of the more terrifying parts in the movie for that, because it's total just psychotic and gone, and like it is boiled down to that almost animalistic state,
right? And it's interesting
and it's
because
frightening.
Earlier when he's at his desk dreaming and he's yelling, he's doing the same guttural sounds in his dream while he's chopping up his family.
Right. Oh man, this movie is creepy as all fucking hell, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean
it's more you talk about it. Like I find that more there are other sort of startle me or make me jump more in horror, or there's movies that sustain the anxiety feeling a little more for me in horror. But like very few films reach that sort of just primal level of fear and sort of just perfectly kind of capture the feeling of going insane than this one does. And everybody pretty much goes insane in this movie. You can even see it in Wendy just a little bit.
Right. And then there's the mythological aspect of it as well. Where it's like it like takes those the key fundamentals of humanity and breaks down everything around it and then shows you the person, which to me is way more interesting than just saying, yeah, he's an alcoholic and that's the reason why, but he's still okay, he's still fine. It's Kubrick is saying the alcohol just brings out who the real person is. So it's the alcohol isn't the baseline. It's not the reason. It's just
it's fuel.
Yes. And so let's break it down to the actual reason. Jack is the one that's doing. Yeah. Which I think and that's like for a ghost story, just fundamentally, like taking it outside of the entertainment realm, a ghost story should almost inherently be a happy story because of the fact there's something after death.
Yeah.
So that's not the end. It's like you can keep living. So then, okay, maybe you could have some visceral fear from being chased by things or whatever. But for the fundamental part of it, it's not going to really. It might just change a few things, but you're going to keep living. You don't fear for your life in the sense that now once they kill me, that's it. You can realize there's something else. But what this fear taps into is, what if you were in a situation with people that were going to do harm to you and you could never get out of it? even in death,
Yeah.
you would be stuck with this person forever and ever and ever to do with you as he pleases. That's way more frightening, way more psychologically interesting that could capture you and keep you and torture you forever.
So it's almost like a labyrinth of a film, kind of in a way,
Yeah.
or of a thought,
Mhm.
being trapped in there with no way out at all.
Yes. And I think it's also interesting that there are so many teases of Jack maybe sexually abusing Danny.
That was something I've always read about, and you can kind of see glimpses of it. But I think the golden sort of way it's done with Kubrick is that he never explicitly says yes or no or anything like that.
Mhm.
He never even really explicitly gives hints to yes or no. It's kind of just
It's there for you to
there,
interpret it.
sort of like the whole Native American kind of aspect of it as well,
Right.
which obviously I can't get into because I don't know it off the top of my head. But there's a lot of sort of references to. I see. I can't get into it because I don't know it off the top of my head.
Right. Well, there was the very interesting thing, like during the throwaway dialogue part, like they're saying, like this hotel was built in the early 1900s, and even by 1908, they were having to repel attacks from the Indians. Well, it's like if you know
Yeah.
anything about history, you're like 1908. That's like industrial revolution. That's a few years before World War One. There were no
Yeah.
Indian attacks during then. So it's like some of that dialogue could just be throwaway dialogue. Some of it could just be like subconscious, like there's some evil thing going. It's a Indian burial ground and something bad. There's a curse here. But then some of it makes you think of, well, that's weird. Why would they put that there? And there's a
Yeah.
lot of that in this film. So much so to where you have entire movies based on crazy people trying to come up with what The Shining really is all about. You know, I don't know if you've ever seen the Room 237 documentary, but there are some
I
crazy
haven't.
fucking
Yeah.
people. Well, they're saying like this was Kubrick admitting that he actually faked the moon landing.
I've seen that theory before, and I've seen how it's like Danny wears an Apollo sweater at one point,
Yes.
but it's kind of like, nah, it fucking happened, you idiot.
Yeah, I mean, a little boy wearing an Apollo 11 sweater to go into a room that has the stuff that happens that we don't know if it's real or in his mind or what's going on. It's like man, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It's a place to boldly go where no man has gone before. He's landing into a new area of discovery and doesn't know what's in there. What an appropriate visual way to represent that. But no, it can't be that. It has to be an admission of a huge conspiracy.
That always doesn't bother me, I want to say, but it perplexes me, and it's so amusing that people can actually think that was faked.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some decent quote evidence to it, but it just cracks me up. Like, what do you think Kubrick? Why would Kubrick do that? Didn't he have better things to do?
Right? Well, yeah. There's just so many stupid things. I mean, it's like, oh, the Earth is flat. You know? Well, okay, why would they keep it from us? And do you realize there are satellites? I'm going to tell you. I'm going to show you on my smartphone how the Earth is flat. Yeah, okay, whatever. Uh huh.
It's like that's like on their website at one point they had that the Flat Earth Society
Has members
has
all
members
around.
all around the world.
Yep. So I mean, there's no accounting for stupid people.
You're right. You can't fix it.
You know, but I mean, there are so many great details, and I know we're like glossing over like the actual storyline itself, but the storyline is almost secondary. It's like you notice that the first time you go through, and then the second
Mhm.
more times you start noticing details. When Ullman comes to get Jack to show him around the hotel, Jack has an issue of Playgirl magazine,
Yeah.
which for one, just that in and of itself is interesting. That okay, maybe he's reading the articles, but like he shows no affection to Wendy
Yeah.
through the whole film. But it's interesting too if you go and look up the exact issue that is online.
Okay.
There is an article, and when it's one of the feature articles about parents abusing their children.
Okay.
So there are so many like things. Danny is sitting there watching the TV, which is a great shot because there's no cables or anything showing how the TV is working.
Yeah.
That movie is Summer of 42, which is
Okay.
about an older woman that falls in love with a much younger boy during a
Okay.
summer, and they have a little bit of a relationship together. So there's this, it's like everything that is picked for a reason. Now, whether or not we can unlock the reason why Kubrick put that in there is a thought to be discussed. But it's just interesting that there are so many details like that to be unpacked and to be figured out why it's there.
That's very interesting for sure.
And if you really want to go into like the deep end of stuff like that, there's a guy named Rob Ager that has a website that's like exclusively devoted to small details in different films, and he talks about how he thinks like the bear is actually representative of Danny because like the bear eye looks just like the floor designation on the elevator, and how there are different like bears in scenes with Danny. And he just goes into like so many different details about all these small things and the visual references and the color patterns on clothing. How on the door of Danny's room, Dopey, one of the seven dwarfs, is on the door, and after Danny has his vision, Dopey is missing from his door. Danny is no longer a dope. He understands what's going on. Wendy
Right.
is dressed just like a marionette of Goofy in Danny's room.
Okay.
You know, so there's so many of these details to the point to where it's like it would be idiotic to say that it's not important.
Right. Or unintentional or
Right, exactly. I mean, the two girls that and are who knows if they're supposed to be twins. It doesn't actually call them that, but everyone calls them the twins. The mother never shows up, but when they have the scene of them dead with blood on the floor and the axe, there's a chair turned over.
Okay.
So is the chair representative of the mother? Like she was just furniture? Is the chair representative of something else? Why do we never see their mother when we see the two girls and the father? Why is there a young woman in the bathroom that turns into an old woman, but then there's also a third woman with shorter hair that's in the bathtub that's coming up with all the burns? Why is it represented by three women rather than just two women? It'll bake your noodle the more.
That's what I'm sitting here like. I'm sitting here staring off into space like too much.
Yeah, and it's like the layout of the hotel itself is impossible.
Yeah,
Th-
it makes no sense at
there
all.
are exits where there shouldn't be any exits to the outside. There are bends and windows of lights that come in that aren't represented on the outside. When it shows the picture of the hotel from the helicopter shot, there is no labyrinth. There is no hedge maze. The sign for the hedge maze changes positions.
So, but then there's so much of that that it can't be unintentional.
Uh-huh.
It has to be full. It has to be fully intentional.
Right.
It's all that,
Yeah,
like we said earlier, sort of labyrinth filmmaking
exactly.
in a way, or it's almost intentionally trying not to confuse you, but to like disorient you
Hmm.
and get inside your head so that you go insane along with the characters almost.
Yeah, and it goes off into surrealism, which
Oh, 100%.
I know you wanted to talk about some as well,
Yes.
because I've been taking the floor.
Yeah, well that's fine. I mean, like what we had talked about off air on this podcast was going to be a lot of, especially early on or when we do movies like this, it's sort of one of us is going to be a little more knowledgeable than the other, or one of us is going to like the movie a little more than the other or something.
Mhm.
And if they take the floor and spout for 50 minutes like you just did about it all, that's perfectly fine. It's all right. And that's all there is to it. And I'm just going to leave now.
Well, it's interesting. Kubrick, before this movie started filming, he got everyone together and he said he wanted to show them two films because this is what he wanted to make. He showed them The Exorcist, and he showed him what he said was his favorite film at that point
So Racerhead.
was Eraserhead. So David Lynch and surrealism go together better than chocolate milk and cookies.
Oh, I've never tried chocolate milk and cookies.
Oh, you should. It's delicious.
And that wasn't like a euphemism about I've never seen David Lynch. So
It's amazing how many things. I think Lynch and Kubrick have a friendly thing where they make each other's films, because this is very Lynchian, and Eyes Wide Shut is very Lynchian.
And you and I have just recently went all the way through Twin Peaks for the first time, and you and I sort of talked about that and them trading them back and forth and such.
There is so much Twin Peaks, I think, from this.
Yes, there's a lot of influence of The Shining, especially I would say in The Return.
Yes.
But you were right sort of about them trading back and forth, and this is just from me not seeing any any other David Lynch yet other than Twin Peaks. But it's sort of, if Eraserhead inspired The Shining, then The Shining sort of inspired Twin Peaks, and Twin Peaks sort of inspired other things. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I don't know how much of that is in Eyes Wide Shut or anything. I haven't seen that one yet. I do have it on Blu-ray.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's really interesting that how well these two filmmakers complement each other and better each other's work through their own. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's they've tapped into the same type of thing that they understand about the subconscious and horror and families breaking apart, and like
hmm
showing supernatural in a way to where your brain doesn't go, that couldn't happen, because up until, I mean, you could even say through the whole film, but up until a very certain point, any of it could literally be written away as this is all in Jack's head.
Yeah.
I mean, there's even, you could even say that half of the movie is Jack's book that he's writing, if you wanted to view it that way. And the stuff that
What if all of it is Jack's book?
see, you could even say that too. There are so many ways of looking at this, and Kubrick and Lynch specifically, other filmmakers do it as well too. They encourage the viewer to see it how they want and to come to their own conclusions and to make it cool and interesting for themselves. And I love them opening it up to a certain way to where they include me in the making of the film cool and the making of the film personal. And I like it
Yeah.
when that happens. You have to plan for that, and that takes a lot of forethought to even be able to understand. Okay, what will people notice? What will people make theories about? And then I'm going to put that into the movie. I'm gonna explain this, but I'm going to leave this open, and I'm gonna say these two things that don't match up, but I'm going to allow for that within the script so that it can either be taken as naturalistic or supernatural. And I love all that forethought and all that planning and all that detail.
Going back then to surrealism in this film,
Mhm.
because I know we touched on it quickly and then went over to Lynch a little, and along with going insane, I find in a way this movie, it starts very ominous, right?
Mhm.
We'd already mentioned that, but I do feel like it starts very straightforward
Yes.
in a way, other than sort of the, what we were talking about, the very obvious, like the hotel, it can't exist in that way without, there's no labyrinth there or any of that. It's played very straightforward, and a lot of the surreal elements don't come until later in the film.
Right.
Especially I would say in the last 40 minutes is
Mhm.
where it really starts to just go and go and go and go. But I do think that's a really interesting way to sort of explore the concept of insanity. And as Jack goes more insane, the film devolves more into that surrealism. So it's like the film almost goes insane along with Jack. And we also see Wendy go a little insane as well, but she comes back around a little bit towards the end. But obviously, the two of them are going to be fucked up for the rest of their life, kind of thing, right?
Right.
You can't really get out of a traumatic experience like that without a little bit of, trauma. But yeah, I thought it was very interesting how sort of straightforward it is at the beginning, but then somewhere in there, and I can't really pinpoint the exact place it is, probably the bathroom scene is where it switches in. And would that be, do you think that's maybe the scene where Jack flips kind of essentially, or do you think it's more gradual?
When he's looking over the miniature of the maze.
Right. Yeah. That's quite early on as well.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely at that point, yeah, he's full blown into going, what year is it?
That's an interesting point too, is in the labyrinth. Obviously you can boil it down to um how Danny escapes him in the labyrinth is because he was there earlier with his mother,
Mhm.
so he knows it. But there's sort of a, I don't want to say metaphorical level to it, where Danny still has that almost childlike innocence and mind, and can escape from that scary element. Well, that's the point. Jack is lost, and we were talking about how he gets animalistic, and that's where he's gone, right?
Hmm.
So almost entering that labyrinth and Danny escaping from it is him quite literally and figuratively escaping from his father and escaping from that torment and from that brutality and stuff. Well, it's truly what just consumes Jack almost.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the things too. There's a lot of horror films that play upon the trope of the characters being idiots.
Yeah.
And this is the natural elements keep them from leaving. Jack doesn't do anything until it's like impossible for them to leave.
Hmm.
And then he starts going more and more towards violence and what he wants to get done. But both Danny outsmarting Jack by doing his tracks backwards and figuring out the way to get out of the maze, and then Wendy, even though people don't really talk about it, she is like the perfect foil for Jack and does everything right to
Yeah.
get her and her son out to safety.
Hmm. Not only that, but she seems like just a nice and decent person.
Right. That's
And a
really
good
concerned.
wife as well. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Even though Jack doesn't deserve it whatsoever.
no, there's a lot of like, do you want some tea? I'll make you some sandwiches. He's like, fuck off, bitch.
Right.
There's a
But
lot of really great lines too with stuff like that.
but you can't have her personality too strong at the beginning, because if so, then you're like, well, she would have just left Jack. It doesn't make sense why she would stay
Yeah,
with him.
exactly.
So that's one of the things I like about the movie more than I do the book. Is the book is like, Jack is redeemed, everything's fine, it was just the alcohol, and it's like Wendy is like way too strong of a character, and it doesn't make sense why the two of them would be together when they have these problems. And I know people have talked to me and are like, Garrett, that's just humans. Humans do that all the time. And I'm like, well, sure they do, but the way it comes across is too simplistic. And it's like this. There's a reason. There's a motivation for the characters and the way things happen.
And there's almost a Stockholm syndrome to it as well.
Right.
You can't help but feel like maybe there's the obvious abuse towards Danny kind of implications throughout the film, but I mean there would have to be assumingly some abuse towards Wendy as well in some capacity.
Right. Yeah. And
So maybe
it
it's
seems
just
like it's
that
a lot
becoming
more like emotional and verbal.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe that's reflective of, well, I mean, and Kubrick probably intended that as well.
Right.
There's obviously those notorious stories of him being very brutally, I don't want to say abusive, but his directorial style towards Shelley Duvall being very over the top and such. Maybe to get her in that mindset, maybe to push her to her limits and to bring out a great performance kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, worst director and nominee and worst actress nominee.
Which just goes to show that those awards ceremonies mean nothing, because it's whether or not the film is memorable later on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this is one of the few films that the Razzies have come out and said, yeah, we fucked up, because it was the first annual Razzie Award. So
it's amazing the long takes in this film too.
mm-hmm.
And it's like there's a lot of triangles. Like there is the picture of the Overlook Hotel with the roof, which is an obvious triangle, and the mountain behind it, which is an obvious triangle. And it fades into a shot from the side that the camera is on a track, and it is moving as the secondary picture is fading in to a ladder that is in the shape of a triangle, and they perfectly match the front of the hotel with the ladder as the fade ends.
Right.
And there's so many really cool parts of that. It's so interesting, in fact, that some theaters have done where they show the end of the film and the beginning of the film all the way through with the photography overlapped, to see if they can figure out times when the picture does things like that. Which is really weird to me.
Yeah.
But there is almost like a clockwork
Orange.
No. I mean, Kubrick was a musician. He played the drums, so like timing, he would really understand. And the way the film is edited and timed, there are things that hit time at a very specific location and spot, and that's one of the things that Rob Ager also talks about.
Mm-hmm.
So I highly recommend anyone who wants to read more into it go to his website, search for him on Google.
Hey, now calm
Where he
down.
talks
Now.
about
This
those.
isn't the.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to like say all this stuff and act like it's just me
No, I
that
know.
came up with it.
I was just
I
making it
want to give him
funny.
credit. Yeah. But I just want anyone else that's listening to know.
Yes.
That, like this is he's like one of the preeminent guys for figuring this stuff out and watching the film so many times and knowing about this stuff. And it's helped me to watch the film and look for things myself because of things that he points out.
Mhm.
And I like that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Garrett Brown, which of course, why would I know about anyone named Garrett? The guy who invented the Steadicam. It was used. I don't know if this was the very first film, but Rocky had it when Rocky is running up the steps
Mm-hmm.
in Philadelphia during his jog at the end. That was the Steadicam use, and Garrett Brown used this for following Danny when he's riding on his tricycle. So this is fairly close to the first usage, first few years of it being used. And it's that really neat thing too with the audio of him going over the hardwood floor and then
Yeah, I love
the
that.
rug. Was there anything else about the cinematography you thought was cool?
I really like the shot when Jack's busting through the door with the axe.
Yes.
And how the camera like whips with the axe as well. So it winds up with him and then it jolts into the door almost. It gets you like in the axe's mind, if that makes sense.
Yes.
You're almost the axe. You're the one busting down that door. It's very interesting.
And then the shot too on the inside of the bathroom when the wood is like flying right at the camera, and that looks so great on a huge screen at the cinema.
Oh yeah, I gotta see it if it ever comes back around up here. But I live in a small town in the middle of nowhere in Canada, so it'll probably never happen.
Well, hopefully it does.
We got Hereditary, and I was like, "What the what? Why?" I had to wait a month and a half after release date to see La La Land because it didn't come here, even though it had 2 big stars, and was like, I was like 2 weeks before the Oscars, so it was huge buzz at the time. And I was like, "Why didn't you get this earlier, you idiot?" Yeah, whatever.
What a bunch of jerks.
I know. No, I understand why they do it. Just from money.
All right, for money.
Yeah. Got to stay in business somehow. But
so
another one of my favorite shots.
Yes.
And you were talking about long takes is and it's the most frightening scene for me because I can never get the timing. It's kind of like the Things jump scare in the blood testing scene, but it's when Scatman comes back and is walking in, and he's walking down the hallway calling out to everybody, "Are you there?" kind of thing. The camera's slowly just following him, and then it goes on for like 40 seconds, maybe longer, and then Jack runs out from behind one of the pillars and hits him with the axe. That sort of creeping and looming shot following him through, it's so fantastic. Oh man, it's just so good. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where like I was saying about Kubrick being aware of timing. It's like he knows. It's like you expect it, and then it doesn't happen for so long. You're like, well, maybe it's not going to, because it goes past the point of where you thought you were going to be surprised by it, and then it's at that point that he comes out, and it's just like you said, it's so well done. It's so well lit because it like changes the lighting depending on which direction you're looking at it in. And that's another thing we didn't talk about. The lighting all looks so natural. It looks like they're snowed in. The lighting was so hot on set that it actually burned the set down.
Yeah. Wasn't there there's a really ironic photo of him standing in the wreckage laughing?
Yes.
Because it's because doesn't the book end with the hotel burning down?
Yes.
And Kubrick thought that was fucking dumb, so he didn't do it. But then when they wrapped, like 5 days later, it burned down. So there's him fucking just laughing in there. That's great.
And we talked about his death, but we really didn't talk much about Scatman himself.
Yeah.
And how he worked really well. I mean, typically, I don't like kids in film. But Danny did a really good job, especially with him being a first-time actor.
An only-time actor.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, he's never in another movie.
Well, I mean, you hit the top. You worked with Kubrick. You don't need to work with anybody. Everything would be downhill from that.
And that's very interesting on how the story of how he didn't know he was filming a horror movie. He thought he was just filming a drama, and he didn't know until he was like 16 years later. No, when he was 16. Yeah. He says he also doesn't find it scary because he was there behind the scenes.
Sure.
Which makes sense. Now, you were talking about Scatman, and they have a really interesting scene early on where they break down what exactly The Shining is. And I think that's a really good way to set up that sort of power and all that. And you get the hints of him having it. Well, he says it explicitly. But they build up Scatman as this character that is going to save the day. And he's connected to Danny. And he gets a premonition and feeling and he goes back to the hotel. They're setting it up and it's all orchestrated as it's right when Jack's going crazy. So Halloran is gonna come back in and save the day and rescue Danny and all that, or they're gonna use their shining powers to save, and he just gets fucking killed. He just fucking dies immediately. He does nothing. He shows up at the hotel and he gets fucking axed. And it's great. It is such a great, like, I don't know, because that's what I felt like when I was watching it the first time. Along like the 4 years ago or whatever, and even this time I was like, "Ooh, he's going to save the day. Here we go!" And then there's that looming shot. We were waiting for it and waiting for it and waiting for it, and then he just dies. Eat that. Scatman can't save the day.
Yeah, I mean it's there are so many good things that work in the plot. Now they have a way to leave because he has the snowcat, and the hotel did get a releasing of power, even though it wanted the young kid. It did, and that's what kind of like started everything back up again. There's a lot of really cool things that happen, and it could have went in so many different ways. But it's like and if you don't have that, then it's like you almost have no deaths at all in the entire film.
Yeah, well, you would have none, wouldn't you? Who else dies on screen that
Well,
are actually there? There's like,
I mean,
there's deaths in the past,
right? You get to see the girls laying
there.
there. Yeah,
but nothing in the story.
But it's like, yeah.
We're gonna start wrapping up in a little bit, but a few more things to talk about. What do you think of the final shot?
Classic.
But what do you think?
Probably one of my favorite endings.
Yes.
What do I think it means?
Do you think it means, Garrett? The Shining, DiNardo.
Well, the thing is, I mean, Bob just represents the evil in the world. Oh wait, I'm sorry. No, that's not what I meant. No, I mean it's like it becomes if you were thinking it was all supernatural, then it like answers your questions as to like, is Jack frozen? Is that the end? Did they win? Well, no, in the end it doesn't matter because Jack has always been there and he is evil. He is the caretaker and it will continue to go down because the hotel's still there. And 10 years in the future, so it'll happen again. It's inevitable. There's always going to be evil that is happening no matter what you really can't escape from it. Even though maybe this specific family escaped from it, you never can escape from it. So there's like, it's a down ending because it's going to keep happening. If you think of it as the entire thing just being in Jack's head, then you're like, I don't know what to think now. This raises way more questions,
Right.
And it's sort of like, regardless of what it is that you thought about the nature of the film, it's an uneasy feeling. And that's really hard to do with a movie because someone would be able to say it was a positive thing. But it's like Jack being there in different years and somehow either traveled through time or just is timeless makes it really difficult to have a good feeling.
Now, you made a joke about Twin Peaks.
Yes.
But do you almost boil it down to sort of, let's say Jack is Frank Silva, and that maybe Jack Torrance looks different, and that we're seeing Bob kind of thing. We're seeing that sort of, and there's always that evil presence there. That's what you're kind of saying?
Which would be like, if that was what I was going to say and that's what I was going to put in a movie, I would be sure to show Bob in the mirror to show that that's what I was going for.
So you would add that dual element. You would have another character.
Yeah.
You would have that Bob.
So I would have someone that kind of acts a little bit like Jack Nicholson. I mean, just off the top of my head, I get somebody like Ray Wise, that's been in other things that kind of has that same face. And
what's he been in?
And then every time I were to show Ray's true self, what the evil was going to be, I would reflect Bob in the mirror against Ray Wise.
Right. You would have that Jack Nicholson
He would always have that
face.
grin.
That's our feature.
He'd have that smirk with his hair slicked back, and then he would see the evil in the mirror. That's what I would do.
Yeah. It's kind of, so you're saying that Jack is sort of the always present and always looming evil in the hotel.
Right.
And no matter who could be the next caretaker, it's going to happen again.
Yeah, and it'll be Jack at all the times. But
it is fucking Twin Peaks.
But you know,
my God.
The other thing is, if I was on a show like how Jack and the evil came about, I would do it like in the photograph. I would have it in black and white in old days, and it would happen, and it would show that something specifically set it off back in the past, but that it continues into this day. We don't really know how to defeat it and all these other things.
Yeah.
But that'll probably never happen.
Can we talk about how interesting and great the music choices are?
Perfection.
Especially, I think at that ending shot, I love old timey, and that was almost 20s music even when it pans down to the 20s, like 1921 or 29.
Yeah,
or
Kubrick specifically looked at all the records that happened to exist during that time period and picked out period specific music that would fit.
And picked out the happiest fucking song for the final shot. It's great. It's such a fantastic sort of juxtaposition of how dark of an ending it is with that happiness.
Midnight, the stars, and you.
You know, back to Lynch. I think Twin Peaks does that too a lot. My Prayer by the Platters is used in The Return, and it's a very dark scene, but it has a very sort of upbeat song.
Dr. Strangelove ends the same way, where
I haven't seen that one yet.
It's spoilers.
So fucking no, stop talking, stop spoiling. Nah, I know a lot about it.
When the bomb goes off, the song is "Somewhere We'll Meet Again." Don't know why, don't know where. It's hilarious. The entire destruction of mankind is like, hey, we'll see each other again sometime.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's great. Now I'm seeing a lot more now that we've talked about it a lot compared again between Twin Peaks and this.
I mean, what would really push it over is like if both of them had lodges and pattern floors, and you wouldn't be able to figure out, like, you could go back in the same room 2 different times, but you're in 2 different rooms, and you just keep going through the curtains, and you'd have to have like a lot of Native American stuff too, like symbols and things. But I mean, you don't want to get too samey.
My God, it has all of those.
Well, what about a little guy saying things backwards? I mean, come on.
Oh no, everything.
Doppelganger.
That's right.
The birds sing a pretty song.
It is happening.
Sometimes
again.
my arms bend back.
What year is it? Now, can you do the Cheryl Lee scream?
No, I'm fine.
Fine. You got any fun factaroonies for me on The Shining there?
Well, I didn't look any of them up.
Got any in the back of your fucking thick skull?
I don't even know. They originally made the door that Jack was chopping down, like Hollywood doors. They're like thinner than a real door. But Jack is actually, or at that time, was a volunteer firefighter. So he chopped through it in like no time at all.
Really?
So they actually had to make the door thicker so that it wouldn't seem like he was busting through it too easily.
Now, didn't they not shoot that scene like?
Oh, they shot it.
But we had to chop through like 89 doors.
There's I don't know the exact number, but there were a ridiculous amount, and I believe that I don't know if it still is, but for a while this had the Guinness Book of World Records for most takes.
Right, I'm sure it still does. I don't know what.
The scene took 3 days to film and used 60 doors, says IMDb.
That's crazy.
Oh, and if you see the Blu-ray of this, unfortunately they fucked up the color timing of the scene with Danny and the ball. And the ball is actually supposed to be yellow. It's supposed to be Jack's ball. But on the Blu-ray, it's like pink. So, but it's like the rest of the film has yellow in it. So I don't know why that specific scene was messed up. So hopefully when it comes out eventually on 4K, or if Criterion does it or whatever, they'll correct that.
Why hasn't like Criterion
done it? For a while, Warner Brothers didn't have... They released their own things, and it's only been recently that Warner Brothers has like let Criterion do stuff. So we're getting some Orson Welles stuff, and we did get a few Kubrick. I mean, up until a few years ago, Lynch, Kubrick, none of those guys had anything. I mean, I guess 2001 was on Laserdisc with Criterion, but for a long time there was like hardly anything or none at all. And it's been in the last few years that they've had releases. So hopefully it'll keep going that way.
Right.
Danny was the one that came up with using his finger to talk as Tony. That wasn't in the script.
That's pretty great. Good on him.
Shelley Duvall suffered from nervous exhaustion throughout filming, including physical illness and hair loss.
Yeah, and they have that in the making of that's on the Blu-ray. Like she says, my hair's falling out, and she holds it up to the camera, and it's like 3 strands of hair, and it's like, come on. So it's like, did Kubrick want her to act as little as possible and actually be fucking frightened out of her head? Yes, you know. So it's like it was work, exactly, but it wasn't like, you know, there's not going to be like a Me Too movement based on actually working for a movie and acting as little as possible and making it feel as real as possible. The film was actually shot in order as the script was written, so that means every single set had to be standing anytime so that Kubrick could just go over and shoot when he wanted.
That's crazy.
So
That's very
every soundstage at the studio was used. So this actually pushed back the release of like Empire and a couple other movies that were filming around the same time because Kubrick was using everything.
Well, our last film, Raiders of the Lost Ark, used the same sort of sets area. The Well of Souls scene was one of the sets that just had to be rebuilt with a higher ceiling. And then that was used for the Well of Souls tomb, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, Spielberg is a very big fan of this film.
Right.
Have you seen Ready Player One?
I have seen the clip of where that happens. Yeah.
Seeing that for the first time, seeing that in theaters, and they kept it completely a secret that they did it all together, and even the reviews were like, "Oh, there's just one really good sequence in the middle of the movie," and everybody was keeping it quiet. So when I sat down and saw it in theaters for the first time, and they walk into the Jack's writing room, it was like jaw on the floor. Holy, how did they do this? And obviously, some of it was digital, but man, it is like you walked right onto the set back in the 80s. You know, it's crazy stuff.
What is also interesting that the typewriters change in the middle of the movie.
Mm-hmm. I have seen that, which that's even more that sort of bizarre nature, right? That we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, you know, how do you know what's real if everything seems unreal and surrealist?
Now, speaking of typewriters, legend has it that Stanley Kubrick did all of the typewriting himself. That he wrote all of the papers of All Work and No Play Make Jack a Dull Boy.
That's not true. It was actually one of his secretaries.
I thought it was, yeah. I just read it a second ago when I was leafing through some dialogue that it was like, legend has it was him. But I always heard it was somebody else. But I had also heard that there was like 500 fucking pages of it.
Yeah, and the other thing is
every single one.
The other thing, it's not all in English. For the foreign releases of the film, he had her type it in French and Italian and German.
Jesus.
So it wouldn't have to be subtitled. They would literally have those pages in their language, and he filmed all of those.
That's nuts.
Yep. Welcome to Kubrick's world.
La 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 la. Kubrick's world.
That's why it's hard to just sit and watch a regular film. I have these expectations.
Yeah.
He is a professional filmmaker.
Yeah. Stanley Kubrick had considered Robert De Niro and Robin Williams for the role of Jack Torrance.
I thought it was interesting. Robin Williams, he said, was too crazy, and he didn't think De Niro could get crazy enough.
That's interesting. Too psychotic for the role after Mork and Mindy is really interesting. Now, could you have imagined Robin Williams in this? I think it would have been a little bit too psychotic. It would have been scary. Like, I think it would have been more so than Jack Nicholson even is. Although I can't imagine anybody else other than Jack Nicholson in this role. I do think like if you picture him doing that, it would be fucking really weird.
Yeah, well, and at this time too, like everyone knew Robin Williams just from comedies. I almost think like you couldn't handle him being serious.
Right.
You would expect him to start doing a voice and to, you know, it's almost like with Jim Carrey. It would, especially at the beginning of his career, it would be really difficult. I think that's why Cable Guy did so terribly because people really just didn't know how to take it.
People wanted a comedy, and they got
Yeah, and
dark.
they got a very dark movie, and they thought that the tone was off, and they couldn't accept it as a film.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think Cable Guy is like great.
Mm-hmm.
But so I mean, Williams could have done a good job, but I think especially with for them trying to make money on this, I don't think it would have worked very well.
Now you said about the Blu-ray having that color off
Yeah.
on the ball, but I thought I could swear that my tennis ball was yellow on my Blu-ray.
You have to go back and find out for sure because
Looks like I have to watch the movie again.
Ta-da-da-da! And then there are two different cuts. There is a British cut which has a lot of the extemporaneous stuff out of it, and then there's the original US cut that has the longer version.
What's taken out of it for the British cut?
Like most of the stuff, like when Halloran like actually flies in and drives and talks to the guy at the service station.
Really?
Like I think a lot of that's cut. Yeah, it's
Why?
a lot of the setting up stuff, I think,
That's
too.
dumb. Why is that all cut?
Well, when it hit in the US and it didn't make the kind of money, and Kubrick basically realized that people didn't necessarily want to like think, they didn't like ambiguity. He kind of like took all the extemporaneous stuff that made things more ambiguous and just kind of like streamlined the film.
Right. Which almost kills it.
Yeah, I don't think it makes it as memorable.
Yeah.
I mean, there's still a lot of solid, good things there, but I think what makes it really special is the extra stuff that makes you think, and it won't leave your consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I mean, that's
inside your consciousness.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like Kubrick always cuts stuff. He just has to basically leave it alone. I mean, there was originally in between Jack's frozen body and the long slow pan to the picture, there was a scene in between that where Danny and Wendy were found safe in the hospital.
Right.
But Ullman gives them the tennis ball and says that Jack's body wasn't found on the site.
Mm-hmm.
And so people started speculating Jack never existed.
Okay.
And so it's like, first off, it was a one additional rug pulled out from under people. Then they were possibly getting the wrong idea. And it basically, the exact same thing that you want done is established with seeing the old photograph. So he trimmed that part out as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, going back to that, our sort of Bob talk,
Mm-hmm.
how would have been interesting if instead of just showing, I mean, it's an iconic shot of Jack Nicholson's frozen corpse, but what if it was just somebody else? Remember how you said you would have had like a Ray?
Right.
What if it was Ray Wise? Just that was the only shot in the whole movie where he was in it, and it's just some dude frozen in the labyrinth.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets to a point to where it almost like the story starts to unravel at that point.
Yeah. It's almost
Like-
too obvious a little bit.
Well, and the nice thing about Twin Peaks is you have multiple episodes to get people caught up, and you can kind of get away with introducing way more complex ideas
Right.
in that aspect. And because this is 2 hours or whatever, you're kind of limited. I mean, they already hint at it. Well, first off, Grady has two different names.
Okay.
At one point they say Charles Grady, and then
Mhm.
later it says Delbert Grady.
Yeah, I
Now-
noticed that. That was kind of odd.
So could it be that his name is Charles Delbert Grady? Well, sure, it could be that. Or could it be that the guy that's the butler, the waiter, whatever, is one guy, but then when he was the air quotes caretaker and killed his family, it was really Jack. So it's like you kind of already give that hint that maybe that the evil that is being perpetrated by the best people, as Ullman says, stays at the hotel, is Jack, regardless of who the family is. As you kind of already get that suspicion without them having to come right out and say it. So the people that are looking for that have basis to find that, and you don't have to make it so overt that then everyone starts questioning the reality of what they've already seen.
Right. This movie is fucking great.
Yeah. And there's so many things, and every time you watch it, you see something else.
Yeah. No, this is it. Yeah. And especially after talking about it, I let it sit with me for a little bit, but I like to talk to somebody that knows a little bit more about it, but has looked a little bit more in depth into it.
Right.
It really makes me think more on things that I picked up on or things that I've seen. And it really does, despite it being 2.5 hours, make me want to go in and throw it in the Blu-ray right after I finish this recording this. I want to watch it again now. I want to pick up on more stuff. You got anything else for me on The Shining?
No, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like it's fun to actually watch with other people, especially if they've already seen it before. Because then, like in the moment, you can go, "Oh, look at that!" You know.
Yeah.
And there's so many cool things to talk about. But I mean,
actually, my buddy, who's not a horror nut, but he does like a lot of horror, not seen this film.
Yeah, to me, you have to.
Yeah, and I've already called him an asshole. So
did you ever watch?
Down and rewatch it.
Did you ever watch the trailer for this?
No, yeah, a long time ago, right after I had watched it originally. I like watching trailers after seeing movies for the first time if I've never seen a trailer, to see how it sort of like spoils it. But I do love the sort of story of how he could get the red blood in the trailer.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't it rusted water? That's what he told him it was.
Mm-hmm.
It's not blood. What are you talking about? Good stuff.
Yeah. And it's to me that's the perfect teaser trailer. You know who's in it, and it's a hotel, and something happens at the hotel. The end. Come see it or not. I don't care.
See it or don't. I don't give a fuck. Well, I do because I won't be able to work if you don't.
Right. Little fucks given.
Yeah, only a couple. Well, that'll about do it for this episode of the Digital Drive-In, then, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
We went a little bit longer than we did with Raiders, but there's a lot to unpack in this one, isn't there?
Yeah, and with editing and everything.
Sure, yeah, I guess. Why don't you go ahead and tell... Actually, I'll tell the audience what's next week.
Good, because I don't remember.
And also because you talk too much. So this week we looked at one of Garrett's favorite movies ever. And I mean, next week, I suppose you like that one a lot too. But next week we'll be taking a look at one of my favorite movies, or what I would call maybe my all-time favorite movie, which is Back to the Future. A little bit of a change of pace after The Shining, but again, that's what we're here for on the Digital Drive-In, right? Just movies that we fucking love.
And it's a classic.
And it is absolutely a classic. So we hope you join us next time as we gush about another perfect movie. Ew.